I got asked to come to Iowa City, I said yes right away because I lived in Iowa for just 4 years, but those 4 years inspired 3 books for me. And I don't write books very quickly, so for me that was a lot of inspiration from a short time, a relatively short time here. So it's really fun to be back here. I'm going to be talking about Button Down today, and you might notice something Iowa related on the cover if you look at the details of the type. Does anybody notice anything that might be related? Right here in front. He is wearing a football helmet. And what is really big in Iowa City? Yes? Yep, Hawkeye football. And if you'll notice the black and gold letters there, that's for Hawkeye football. Well, Button Down is my 4th novel. I started with a book called Dear Papa. It was my first novel set in Minnesota, where I was living at the time. This is a family picture of my Aunt Betty, my grandpa down there at his filling station, and the house my mom grew up in. And we're talking about ideas today, and I get my ideas from photographs and works of art. So I went from that to Little Klein, which also takes place in Minnesota in the 1940s. And then I moved to Iowa and found inspiration here in Iowa with a story. I won't go into the whole story of how I got started with The Luck of the Buttons, but I'm just going to share with you a short piece from The Luck of the Buttons to introduce you to the Button family, because Button Down is part of a trilogy about this family. So there's a character in this book named Tugs Button. She has a cousin named Ned, who we're going to be talking about in a minute. But this scene at a family reunion tells us a little bit about the Button family. The Buttons bumped along the muddy, rutted road, windows down to lure a breeze. Tugs waited for reprimand, but none came. She supposed it wasn't the best luck to begin her lucky life by yelling at her elders. But it was done, and despite the ache her damaged camera produced, she felt surprisingly free and light. Lucky. She was lucky. Her heart sat high in her chest, and she would have sung a tune if she could have thought of a tune to sing. Buttons were not singers. Come to think of it, there were a lot of things Buttons weren't. Buttons weren't dancers. They weren't athletes or readers or jokesters or artists. They weren't good students or good listeners or standout citizens. The only time a Button had made the Goodhue Gazette, back when there was a Goodhue Gazette, was when Granddaddy Ike accidentally set the town hall on fire with a cigarette when he nodded off in the lobby next to a full trash can. Not much chance of Buttons appearing in the new Goodhue Progress either. Those are the Buttons. The Buttons are an unlucky family. Tug set out to become the first lucky Button, but the Buttons do most things wrong. And Tugs's cousin Ned, at the beginning of this story, had a line that stuck with me as I wrote. The Tugs and her cousin were going to run in a 3-legged race on the 4th of July. And Ned is pretty sure they aren't going to win. They are Buttons, after all. He says, "We aren't going to win, are we?" Ned continued. "Nope." "That's okay. I just like to race. I can't catch a football, but I still like to play." Well, when I got to the end of writing The Luck of the Buttons, that line stuck with me. I can't catch a football, but I still like to play. And I have a lot of Button in me. My family called me Calamity Ann growing up. If there was something to fall off of, I could fall off of it. I couldn't catch to save my soul, but we played all kinds of neighborhood games, baseball in the alley, we played soccer, we played football, and I was never the one to catch the ball. But I was tall, and when you're in elementary school, people will pick you because you're tall and can block or supposedly catch a basketball and put it in the hoop, though I never could. Well, that really intrigued me, what Ned had said. And all the while I was writing The Luck of the Buttons, I had this picture up for the character of Ned. I get a lot of my ideas from family photos, but I also get them from works of art. And when I was living in Cedar Rapids, this painting, this Grant Wood painting, Plaid Sweater, was hanging in an exhibit. In fact, they had flags out with this on it, and I came back to see it at the University of Iowa Art Museum, and you can visit that painting here yourself. I love this painting. This is clearly not a button in this painting. A button wouldn't be dressed that nicely or be standing quite that confidently. But I imagined that this is how Ned thought of himself. This boy Ned, who was the younger, always kind of the shadow to his outgoing cousin Tugs, he couldn't catch a football, but he imagined himself as this boy who could catch a football. So when I finished writing The Luck of the Buttons, I went to look up a little bit of history about football in 1929, which is when the Luck of the Buttons takes place. I found what a football would have looked like in 1929, a little bit different than what we have now. Still made out of leather, which they'd call pigskin. But most kids wouldn't have had their own football. And I discovered that Kinnick Stadium, which was then called Iowa Stadium, opened in the fall of 1929. And then I knew I had a story. Imagine that one of the kids from Goodhue, Iowa, one of the older kids, was going to be an Iowa Hawkeye football player. That would be a huge deal in that town. So I kept researching Iowa City. There's the new stadium going in. Here's one of the games. I looked at the uniforms. And some of the players, there's some great history with the players. This is a player named Willis Glasgow, who was very famous. There was Nanny Pape, Willis Glasgow, these great names. Bronco Nagurski playing for Minnesota. And I found all kinds of old Hawkeye paraphernalia. The players would sign autographs for kids who would go to the games. This was a little later. But I started imagining that Ned might get a chance to go see Lester Ward, who was the player from Goodhue that was going to be an Iowa Hawkeye. I imagined him trying to get a chance to go to Iowa City to see a game. And when I saw these old pictures of Iowa City, I realized it's quite a bit different than living in Goodhue, Iowa. And buttons were also not travelers. Now, when we were asked to do this festival, we were each interviewed and given a set of questions, and one of the questions we were asked was, what was a childhood fear? And one of my fears as a child, I lived by the Mississippi River in Minneapolis, and I would dream that I was walking across the Lake Street Bridge, which had been condemned since my mom was a kid, so it was a rickety old bridge. But I would dream that the bridge would fall down, and I would land in the river, swim to the other side, which was St. Paul, and not be able to find my way home again. So I gave that fear to my character, Ned. I imagined, here's this boy it involves him trying to catch a football, but then trying to get to Iowa City. And he both wants to go to Iowa City, but he's also afraid to go to Iowa City because he's afraid of being lost. So the chapter I'm going to read to you today is called Yellow Brick Road. And it's Ned and his great-granddaddy Ike, who lives next door. After supper, Ned walked Granddaddy Ike to his one-room cottage next door and helped him get settled in his chair. "Read me a chapter, will you?" said Granddaddy, sitting back with his pipe. "You'll fall asleep if I start reading." Ned needed Granddaddy's ear. Talking to him was like throwing a ball against the school wall. It's not that Granddaddy said so much, but he listened in a way that sent Ned's thoughts back to him with new bounce. "Never too tired for my friends Toto and Scarecrow." "Can we read tomorrow?" "You're what, 10, 11, said Granddaddy, "and you don't have time to read an old man a story? You've got all the time in the world." "It's me who's got more to get done than I got years." "I'm 11, Ned muttered. "It's not that." "Books on the shelf. Go on now." Ned went to Granddaddy's winnings shelf and slid The Wonderful Wizard of Oz out from between a pocket knife and a recording of the Memphis Blues in a worn sleeve. Oz was Granddaddy's one book. He'd won it in a checkers match with Mr. Jackson. The pocket knife was Ned's favorite item on the shelf. A fellow could sure make use of a pocket knife. "I'm having a birthday over here," said Granddaddy. Ned sat on the footstool and opened to the page held by the slim green marking ribbon. Last time they read, the Cowardly Lion had been saved from the poisonous flowers by 1,000 mice. And though Ned and Granddaddy had read this book over and over, and though he would rather be sorting out his Burton and Iowa City problem, Ned was anxious, despite himself, to get Dorothy safely back to Kansas. Chapter 10, he read, Guardian of the Gate. Ned read fast, stumbling over some of the words that were covered by the green drawings, getting the troop up to the farmhouse and safely inside for porridge. But when the farmer asked Dorothy, "Where's Kansas?" Ned hesitated. Imagine not being able to get home again. Imagine somebody saying, "Where's Goodhue?" It made his supper turn over in his stomach. Did people in Iowa City know where Goodhue was, the way people in Goodhue knew where Iowa City was? Ned had been as far as Swisher. He'd even been to the uncle's farm on the edge of Iowa City, the university buildings visible in the distance. But there'd never been an occasion to actually venture into town. Ned knew the streets of Goodhue like he knew every inch of his and Gladys' room. He'd never been lost. University, the universe in a city. What would that look like? "Granddaddy?" Ned asked. "Mm-hmm. What's the farthest you've ever been away from Goodhue? Have you ever been into Iowa City? Have you seen the university? If so, how did you get there? Have you ever been out of the county? During the war you must have been, right? Have you ever been out of Iowa? Have you ever been lost?" "Whoa now," said Granddaddy. "That's a pile of questions." He lifted the book out of Ned's hand and carefully replaced the ribbon before closing it. He took his pipe, which until now had just been dangling in his mouth like a toothpick, filled the bowl, tamped it, and lit it with a match from the side table drawer. He breathed in as he held the match to the bowl. Ned relaxed into the dark, sweet smell. I might have underestimated you," said Granddaddy. "Figured you were like the rest of this lot, tree roots growing out of the soles of their shoes, tethering them to this one spot of soil, now to kingdom come. Rather hear about a thing than do a thing. They sat for a bit, pondering this. The war is a story for another time, but I can tell you that getting lost isn't the worst thing to happen to a fellow," said Granddaddy, "long as you got your wits about you." Granddaddy put the book back on the shelf. He straightened his treasures. "I have been in Iowa City, way back. I have been to the university itself. Suppose I could have studied there myself had circumstances not intervened. I have walked across the river on the new bridge. I have seen those college boys roughhouse on a Saturday night, but I have not been inside that stadium." "They're building a new one," said Ned, "and Lester Ward's on the first team to play in it. They dug a hole 30 feet in the ground. Where do you suppose they put all that dirt?" "That is a poser," said Granddaddy, "but my thinker's turned off for the night. Help me into bed, will you?" he said. "Now I am tuckered." "Don't you want your nightshirt?" said Ned. "Nah, just bring me a glass for my teeth and pull back the covers. I'll climb in like this, then I won't have to worry about getting dressed in the morning." Ned gave Granddaddy a hand up on the stool he used to climb into the tall bed. "There now," said Granddaddy, "there's a good boy." There. Granddaddy pulled the covers to his chin and dropped his uppers and lowers into the glass Ned held out. "One more thing," he gummed. "It's not the getting lost you got to worry about. It's the not getting started." "A Hawkeye game in Iowa Stadium," Granddaddy murmured. "That would be something for the shelf." Ned stood in the doorway, wondering if he should respond, but Granddaddy's loud breathing was growing deep and even. Ned stepped over to the winnings shelf and ran his fingers over the pocket knife, traced the M of Memphis. "I did catch Lester Ward's football today, Granddaddy," he whispered, easing out the screen door and gently pushing it shut. He could hear Granddaddy snoring through the open window before he reached his own porch. Thank you. Well, the rest of the story tells about Ned's quest to catch a football and retrieve it, and to get to Iowa City. And I'll let you read the chapters that actually, when he actually finds what the universe in a city is really like. Any questions? No? No? Yes? How long has Iowa been around? That's a really good question. It's been, does anyone know the answer to that question? It's been here a long time. It became a state in, there should be some like 4th or 5th graders who know that, right? 1838? Thank you. All right. Well, thank you very much. I will, if there's no questions, I will go on and do the drawing. Oh, I think I have one more picture, but I think it is just the cover again. There we go. Nope, there was another picture of Iowa City on the cover. All right. Thank you very much.